Indonesia is one of the only countries in the world whose economy grew by more than 5% in 2022.
Indonesia has set a growth target of 5.3% next year as the economy continues to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic.
I think the fourth most likely place for investment over the next several years amongst emerging markets.
To the international front, global equities slipped slightly today but were still set for a weekly gain.
How did a country that had the first democratic presidential election in its history in 2004 transform into an economic powerhouse? This is a story of authoritarianism, corruption, revival, and what we can all learn from it. The Indonesian economic miracle. Like most territories with an abundance of natural resources, the archipelago of Indonesia was once a Dutch colony, before a guy with only one name, Sukarno, and his friend named Muhammad Hatta, proclaimed its independence following World War II. While this should have been a cause for celebration, the good times were short-lived, as Sukarno quickly installed a brutal and authoritarian communist regime, the PKI, that lasted for over 20 years, until a military coup led by another guy with only one name, General Suharto, overthrew it in 1965. We can trace the beginning of Indonesia's economic ascent to this Sukarno and Suharto beef. Unlike his communist predecessor, Suharto, who was officially appointed president in 1968, welcomed foreign investment into the country, and this began the gradual process of shifting its economy away from one dominated by subsistence agriculture to industrialization and urbanization. Over the next 3 decades, GDP rose by an average rate of 7% per year, and the official poverty rate fell from 60% to 15% during this time period. Indonesia had arrived, until the Asian financial crisis hit the country hard in 1997. At one point in 1998, the inflation rate was 78% and the Jakarta Stock Exchange crashed, causing widespread riots throughout the country and ultimately the resignation of President Suharto after 30 years of rule. But the country had a few things going for it that enabled it to emerge from this brief period of instability better than ever before. Drivers of Indonesian success. 1. Natural resources. We have already mentioned Indonesia's abundant natural resources, from palm oil to timber, to delicious coconuts, and so much more. These form the foundation of the country's economic success. Together, agriculture and mining account for nearly a quarter of the country's economic output, the most of any sector. 2. Manufacturing. A sign of a genuinely healthy, self-sustaining economy is how many things it makes and exports compared to how many things it imports. By this measure, Indonesia's trade surplus, the amount by which exports exceed imports, hit a fresh record last year of more than $50 billion on the back of high commodity prices. Kesan, a trade ministry spokesperson with one name like the country's former presidents, said another surplus is expected this year. Indonesia is also a top 15 auto parts manufacturer, in particular motorcycle parts. Upon learning that motorbikes are the most popular mode of transport in the country, with a whopping 85% of all households owning at least one two-wheel form of transportation, this makes a lot of sense. 3. Infrastructure. All of this is only possible with consistent investment in roads, railways, and ports that have taken place over the past few decades. The current administration of Joko Widodo has increased annual infrastructure spending nearly every year since he took office in 2014. This has enabled the next success driver, tourism. 4. Tourism. With an abundance of beaches, a bustling urban center infrastructure, and warm weather year-round, Indonesia is on a lot of preferred destination lists. Although it accounts for only about 5% of GDP in any given year, a figure that is lower than most of its G20 counterparts. Tourism is a growth sector for the country, as remote work continues to take off and its comparatively low cost of living is experienced firsthand. Before we mention the last driver of success, Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and turn on notifications if you want to know when we release the next video that you can learn something from. 5. Entrepreneurship. Nearly 60% of Indonesia's population now lives in urban centers. This means mobile internet use and an abundance of modern services have proliferated thanks to what TechCrunchers called a burgeoning startup economy. A healthy amount of venture capital investment, totaling over $4 billion in 2022 alone, has made this possible. While most of this is going into tech-enabled businesses in and around the capital of Jakarta, startups based in secondary cities like Semarang and Medan that are attempting to make everyday things like farming and transportation easier are beginning to get noticed, ensuring that the country's startup ecosystem will continue to grow. Lessons for the world. Indonesia has come a long way since it was a Japanese-occupied territory in World War II. Other countries would do well to heed some of the lessons of its rise, such as sustainable growth. The Southeast Asian nation hasn't pursued a growth-at-any-cost model, and it shows. Although its national debt has steadily been growing each year for the past decade, Indonesia's debt to GDP currently stands at just over 40%, pitting it firmly in the bracket of the world's least indebted countries. On the other hand, steady investment in infrastructure and the maintenance of a solid manufacturing base has given it the third highest GDP growth rate in the world, behind only far less developed nations like Namibia and Botswana. Mutually beneficial partnerships. As an exporting nation, whose value of goods exported exceeds the value of goods imported, Indonesia has far more positive than negative trade balances with its trade partners. This ensures the country gets more or as much as it gives. Foreign investment. Indonesia has been open for investments since the 70s under the presidency of Suharto, but by consistently investing in itself and building up its economy since that time, it has become infinitely more attractive to investors over the last 10 to 20 years. Today, it takes in more than $40 billion in foreign direct investment annually. Just like a business that has gradually built up a brand name for itself over a long period of time, and now regularly receives investment proposals that it can turn down if it doesn't like the terms. The country has become a household name, and everyone loves a winner. Indonesia is a winner on the world stage.